Thank you for waiting, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to have Para Session 3, Climate Security from Asia-Pacific Perspective, Linking Human Mobility and Food Security. The session will be led by Alice Yamabe, Policy Researcher, Sustainable Consumption and Production at IGES. Please join us, Ms. Yamabe.
Welcome to one of the final sessions of this year's ISAP. It is my pleasure to welcome you here. Thank you for those of us who have been part of today's very inspiring many discussions. And thank you to those who are joining us specifically for this session. So my name is Alice Yamabe, and I'm a policy researcher in the Sustainable Consumption and Production team at IGES. And it is my honor to facilitate this session on climate security from an Asia-Pacific perspective, linking human mobility and food security. So before introducing today's speakers, I would like to provide a brief overview of our ongoing project, the Asia-Pacific Climate Security Project. So first, let's start with a quick question. How many of you are already familiar with the term climate security? Can we have a show of hands? Not that many. Okay, so climate security generally refers to addressing the risks brought and multiplied by climate change. So as many of us know, we are already experiencing the many impacts of climate change in our environment and our daily lives through increasing intensified weather events, as well as rising sea levels and so many more. But this policy concept highlights the fact that climate change also can act as a risk multiplier, especially in places that are already characterized by political, social, economic instability, conflicts, natural hazards, diseases such as COVID-19 or trade wars. So this concept has been gathering a lot of attention from policy researchers and policymakers, especially in Europe and in the United States. But it remains a relatively new concept in the Asia-Pacific region, including Japan. So to bridge this gap, IGES has been leading efforts to define a climate security approach in the Asia-Pacific under the Asia-Pacific Climate Security Project. It is funded by Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this project is very much in line with today's theme on taking an integrated approach to overcome the triple planetary crisis. This project aims to provide an integrated view of climate security by focusing on 5 key research areas. So energy security, food security, human mobility, adaptation to climate change, and ocean governance. And we are looking at these different key research areas through different levels of climate security. So, of course, the national security level, because we're making policy recommendations to the Japanese government, but also the regional and international levels, because we're dealing with global and cross-bordering threats. And we're also focusing on human security and ecological security at a more localized level. So through this integrated approach, we aim to highlight the interconnected and continuous nature of climate risks and make informed policy recommendations. In today's session, we will focus on 2 of these areas, food security and human mobility. Those 2 key areas are heavily influenced by negative factors such as diseases, but also conflicts, natural hazards and disasters, poverty, and of course, climate change. So we will be looking at exactly how climate change can impact each of those areas and also act as a risk multiplier. And we will also be looking at how interconnected those 2 areas are and how policies and interventions can maximize synergies while minimizing trade-offs. So without further ado, let's move on to the presentations. So first, Dr. Kurishima Kei She's a policy researcher in the adaptation and water area at IGES. So Kurishima-san, the floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you, Alice-san, for the introduction, and welcome to our session. I am Kei Kurishima from the adaptation and water area of IGES. And as Alice-san has explained, I will be talking about the food security team, what food security team is working on under this Asia Pacific Climate Security Project. So the title of my presentation is Unraveling Land Tenure and Climate Change for Insights into Food Security. And so there's important keywords in my title, which are land tenure, climate change, and food security. And this is what I'm working on for this project. And these three topics all relate to the sustainable development. And as the theme for this year's ISAP is integrated approach, I would like to explain firstly what each topic is, and then explain how these three are related. So for first, I would like to explain what food security is. As you know, like food is like the fundamental part of our life, but for people who are here, I think it might be difficult to think about not having food to eat for every day. But there are countries that are facing food insecurity. And so for the definition of food security by the FAO, it exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. And people are food secure when they have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs for an active and healthy life. And so in the SDGs, the goal 2, zero hunger, relates to this food security. And it says, end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. And especially the target 1 of the goal 2, it aims to end hunger and ensure access by all people, in particular the poor and people in vulnerable situations, by 2030. So food security is a very important issue for sustainable development. And food insecurity, so the situation that doesn't meet the food security, is a serious problem in the developing countries, and especially in the Asia Pacific. I wrote some statistics that shows the serious situation in Asia Pacific. And the first one is of the 3.83 billion people in the world who depend on the agri-food system, 2.36 billion are in Asia, which is half of Asia's population. So a lot of people in Asia depend on the agri-food system for their lives. And 370 million, or half of the world's undernourished people, live in Asia and the Pacific region. And 85% of these undernourished people in Asia Pacific are in South Asia. So from these statistics, we can say that solving the situation, the food insecure situation in the Asia Pacific, will contribute significantly to food security for the world. And so I have explained that food security is very important in the world, and there are still food insecurity situation especially in the Asia Pacific. And this food security is affected greatly by the climate change. So in the report by IPCC, climate change is already affecting food security through increasing temperature, changing precipitation patterns, and great frequency of some extreme events. And it is estimated that 500 million smallholder farms in the developing world are supporting almost 2 billion people who are vulnerable to climate change. So climate change will affect these smallholder farms, and in turn will affect the food systems of more than 2 billion people. And climate change will also have broader impact through effects on trade flows, food markets, and price stability, and could introduce new risks for human health. So in sum, it is essential to establish sustainable agriculture system for food security, but climate change is a major threat to the sustainable agriculture and also a threat to food security. So here, for securing a sustainable food system, it is essential to take a transformative approach at the global level, but I would also like to emphasize the importance of approaching from the local level. So there was a Asia and Pacific Food Security Forum organized by ADB in April 2024, and President Asakawa of ADB stated at the opening ceremony that some people do not fully understand the link between climate change and food crisis, such as the effects of floods and drought. But from the farmers' perspective, climate change is a serious risk that threatens their livelihoods. So while the entire food system needs transformation, addressing the specific risks and solutions from the perspective of individual farmers can drive significant change globally. So my research delves into the risks and challenges that farmers, local farmers, encounter. And what I especially focus is the relationship between land tenure and food security. And so the considering risks and solutions from individual farmers' perspectives can drive significant change. I have already stated in the previous slide. And especially land tenure security is very important for having a sustainable agriculture. And so because the farmers are vulnerable, and they're also vulnerable to climate change, and these climate change policies will also affect the farmers by shifting the land use. And I especially focus on a situation called land tenure dualism. And this is a major, very serious issue in developing countries. And this is because most forests in the developing countries are public land. But in these public lands, or called forests, there are many lands that are used by the communities for agriculture. And also in developing countries, less than 30% of people have rights to tenure. And so the state-owned land include communities' agricultural land. And so there's a gap between the actual system and the gap between the laws and systems and the actual land use. So this is called land tenure dualism. So this is one example of land tenure dualism. The photo on the left is a paddy field. So these photos are both of the fields that I go in Thailand. And the left one is a paddy field in private land. And so the farmers cultivating rice here has rights to private ownership to the land. So they have more food, more security, land security, and also have less conflict for the land. But in the right photo, this is a maize field in state-owned forest. So the land is owned by the state. So the farmers who cultivate this maize has no rights to this land. So they feel less secure for their agriculture, and there will be more opportunities for them to face conflict. But if you see the photos, they look very similar, but the tenure is different, so the situation would also be different. So as I explained about land tenure is also important for climate change. So in the IPCC report, it says land tenure is a key dimension in any discussion of land-climate interaction and will influence the prospects for both rural adaptation and land-based mitigation. And evidence suggests that policies which pay attention to interaction of land and climate and system linkages are more likely to create co-benefits with migration, mitigation, adaptation, and development. But guaranteeing land tenure is often challenging, and it requires significant changes in social systems and laws. So what I want to say is one solution for this land tenure issue is the community-based land management, which recognize land rights according to the actual situation. So in the South, I've done researches in field study in Philippines and Thailand, and I've seen examples of community-based land management in both countries. The one in Philippines is called Community-Based Forest Management Agreement. And this is an agreement between the government and the people's organization to manage and utilize forest land for up to 50 years. And in this forest management, it also includes agricultural land as well. And in the case of Thailand, it is called Policy for Ensuring Community-Based Agricultural Land Management. And so different from the Philippines, in Thailand, apart from the community forests, they also have this community management initiative only for the agricultural lands. So they differentiate forest and agriculture for this community-based management. So in this policy, they cultivate individually, but they have collective rules to manage the agricultural land for the community. So these are some of the examples, and there are many other initiatives all over the world that has this community-based land management. And I'm doing my research. Hi. Okay, to see that this is one solution for this land tenure security issues. Hi, so this, I think my time is up, but I just wanted to say that what effect do community land-based management has. So they have, I've written 3 different benefits, and it strengthens community ties and increase public recognition of land rights, and also the mandate to plant trees on a portion of the farmland produces additional positive outcomes. So for my conclusion, as I explained, the Asia-Pacific faces food insecurity than any other region, and we need a global and regional initiative to transform the entire food system. But we also need to think about how we can support small-scale farmers who are at risk due to the land insecurity, and these land insecurity is worsened by the climate change impact. So the solution that I've written here is taking inclusive and local action is essential for food security and climate resilient agriculture, and community-based land management will enhance the synergy of rural development. And to promote decentralized agriculture through community-based land management, institutional support of the national government and close learning among rural community is essential. Okay, sorry for the time up. Hi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurishima-san. And next we have Dr. Pankaj Kumar. He's a research manager in the Adaptation and Water Unit at IGES. And he's kindly standing in for our initially scheduled speaker, Professor Muhammad Nasif Hassan from Khulna University in Bangladesh, who was unfortunately unable to join us due to political and social instability in his country. So Pankaj-san, thank you so much for standing in last minute, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Elisan, and good afternoon, everyone. Basically, I'm going to talk about the project activities in the sub-theme 2, that is climate-related, climate-induced mobility. And for this sub-theme, we are working in two different study areas. One is in Fiji and one is in Bangladesh. Since last year, we have already actively engaged in the active research work in Bangladesh, and we are going to show you the summary of the research output we have got so far. And the topic I'm going to present, the title is Factors Affecting Habitat Preferences for Environmental Migrants in Coastal Bangladesh. I'm Pankaj Kumar. I'm working as a research manager in the adaptation and water. Next slide, please. So the content of presentation will basically include three components, that is background, methodology, result. Some of the operational definition here, like when we are talking about environmental migrant as a household who were displaced from their rural dwellings places due to environmental hazards and later settled in other rural areas or urban slums. One other point to clarify here is like whenever we are saying that climate induced migration, it does not mean that all the key driver and pressure only include climate change. It also include other exaggerating factors, say for example, water insecurity as well. So whenever I will be talking, it's a combined effect of different drivers and pressures, but mainly focused on climate change. So I'll just take you through different scenarios in the field during different extreme weather conditions. This picture shows that damage of river embankments and temporary solution to connect those villages during the extreme situations. People having hard time to go to those villages. These are the flooded and disconnected houses. And when we are seeing this area, particularly this area, then these are like salt water intruded agricultural field. It means even after drying it up, the field will not be able to use for normal agricultural practices. This is the another picture for submerged agricultural fields. These are some disconnected houses, means some of the rural places are so much disconnected during these extreme weather conditions that they will be totally cut off from the main villages or cities. So they cannot access any resources presenting in those extreme weather conditions. This is temporary slum dwellers, means because of the river embankment shift towards land, the people are forced to change their house or to leave their house and migrate towards nearby rural villages or into the near urban places. So this is one of the example where the slum dwellers has temporarily shifted to the nearby villages. So this study specifically addresses two research questions. What factors drive environmental migrants to choose relocation destination following climate events? And how do environmental migrants' habitat preferences impact their post-migration well-being? For that purpose, we have designed questionnaire survey that it will be involve both qualitative as well as quantitative approach. And for the quantitative approach, I'm just explaining it that it will be, the research will be based on the primary data collected from the respondent. 408 household respondent data collected with a random and systematic random sampling methodology, respectively. We have interviewed 200 respondents from the urban dwellers or the slum being developed in the urban areas in the southwest coastal region of Bangladesh, and 208 respondents from the rural area itself, means nearby, they migrated to the nearby rural areas. And we have applied the method for analyzing those big data. We have used the analytical tool which we used is normalization, linear normalization methodology, but I'm not going to detail because of the time constraint. And these are the equations we have used. And for the model part, we have used regression model, that is OLS and logistic-based model. The variables which we have used to construct respondents' well-being score are mentioned here. Say, for example, I have better income prospect here, means after moving to a certain place, whether they have better income prospect or not. Help from elite people or help from the political group over there. I have an advantage of accessing the natural resources here, and so on. So we have selected n number of questions which decide the key variable which is playing as a role of key determinant for moving places to places for the people in the vulnerable areas. Apart of that, this is one of the only one component of the questionnaire. Other questionnaire component involves socioeconomic questionnaires, which will be later incorporated along this data analysis to figure out the complete picture. This is the study area. We have collected all the samples here. We did the questionnaire sampling here. So the result which we are going to show about is determinant affecting the well-being of the environmental migrant household. What other factors affect the habitat choice of the environmental migrant household? So I'll be just showing couple of results and graphs because of the time constraint. So this is one of the regression results of the determinant of household well-being. As I mentioned before, that what are the key factors or determinant plays a key role while making a decision to migrate to other places, where we have different factors, say, for example, age, living condition, living duration in current areas, access to safe drinking water. As I mentioned before, that climate change itself is not a key driver for this climate-induced migration or climate-induced mobility. That's why we have to consider or take into consideration other key drivers and pressure as well. Based on this table, we can, this table is able to explore the determinant of well-being scores among environmental migrants residing in rural and slum areas using multivariate regression analysis. The results suggest that environmental migration or migrant in slum areas has a well-being score of 1.1 unit lower than compared to that of rural areas. And why it is so, I will be talking in next slide. These finding underscores a nuanced relationship which where accumulating advantages may not necessarily linearly enhance overall well-being. Looking into the other determinants, which is showing the determinant for habitat preference among environmental migrants, then we can see that whether we have access to financial support, access to social safety, or access to safe drinking water, access of early warning system. Then based on that result, this table presents the factor influencing in income levels among environmental migrant in rural and slum area. The regression result indicates that the explanatory variables explained about 1/3 of the variation in income level. Factors such as time constraint during the survey process, cultural differences, and individual heterogeneity accounted for the remaining unexpected variation. Looking into this one, monthly income versus well-being among rural and slum residents. Although this picture looks a bit hard to understand, but the key message I would like to show or I would like to deliver from this picture is, although not any significant differences in monthly income between rural and slum residents in terms of Bangladeshi currency, we found a slight positive association between income and well-being for both groups. Also, the trend line shows that well-being, that as the well-being increases, the monthly income of rural dwellers surpasses that of the slum dwellers in the urban areas. This illustrates that higher well-being is associated with higher income, especially for the rural dwellers. In contrast, urban dwellers do not have a notable increase in well-being in corresponding to their income level increase. When we are talking about well-being pattern of respondents with respect to duration, this is again the key summary from this picture. It illustrates that environmental migrants living in the rural area generally remain in their current location longer than slum residents in urban pockets because of the close association or close support being gathered by the local communities and neighborhood. Here we are showing the societal, political, and financial differences among the environmental migrants. Just one slide, please. Yeah. Slum dwellers have a greater number of resources for receiving early warning, about disaster compared to rural dwellers. This is one of the advantages. Both groups receive post-disaster assistance from the local elites, political leaders, communities, peer-reviewed peer groups, and government to at a like varying extent. Visualizing the discrepancies or disparities, migrants or migrating to the urban areas emerges as a logical and sensible decision, because you have better resources or better access to different resources, early warning system, as well as like jobs opportunities. Sensible decision for individuals seeking improved living standard and to mitigate environmental risk, thus enhancing resilience to environmental risk. So as a concluding remark, in rural areas, respondents appear to enjoy better social capital than the slum areas. This is one of the contrasting picture. Respondent in the rural areas appear to enjoy high level of income if we are going into the longer term. And they are feeling safe well-being as well with the income, higher level of income. Despite lower degree of access to different services, that is sanitation, education, or early warning system, respondent in the rural areas exhibited higher level of well-being score. So this is like preliminary result from first year. And what we are planning is like, first we analyze the migrant issues, and then second year we wanted to also analyze the non-migration issues. And then in the third year, in the final year, we wanted to make a comparative study in order to skim out what is the policy relevant messages coming out of this scarcity, and what is relevant for MOFA to design policy relevant packages for this Asia Pacific region. So that is all from my side. I'll be happy to answer if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pankaj-san. And lastly, but not the least, we have Dr. Okano Naoyuki. He's a policy researcher in the adaptation and water team at IGES. Okano-san, the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's put up a slide. Yeah, thanks so much for staying at the very last moment of the ISAP 2024. And I'm pretty much aware that I'm standing in between the final session and the reception that we are all waiting for. And the good news for you is that my fellow panelists speak more than allocated time, which means that I will speak less. So my presentation will be shorter, even though I don't guarantee that I will speak actually shorter. But nevertheless, please enjoy your final presentation. So what I will talk about is also from climate-induced migration. And my presentation pretty much complements what my co-researcher Pankaj-san presented right now about the Bangladesh case. I will touch upon the Fiji case that we also deal with. And more importantly, what I will touch upon is the policy aspects of this issue. This topic of climate security requires a good integration of climate science and policy analysis. And this is more required in this topic of climate-induced mobility, because on the one hand, as Pankaj-san mentioned, we are not pretty sure how much climate change affects the mobility of the people. It's one of the factors, and we can quantify it, but it's not really straightforward to formulate or articulate the policy approaches toward it. But on the other hand, which is an interesting part of this problem, we actually observe many policy developments, mainly unfolding in the Pacific countries and more in African, Southeast Asian, and Latin American countries, that governments are taking action to treat this climate-induced mobilities. So even though science is not quite clear about whether this topic is a correct unit for policy approach, but we actually observe the policy responses. So it warrants policy analysis as well, and we need to combine what climate science says and what policy says. A brief background of why such policy approaches are rising. there are many backgrounds, but one key thing is that there are many international activities try to predict how many people actually will be moving due to climate change. One well-known report published by World Bank is titled Groundswell, and it's a part 2 version that I showed this visual here, says that 216 million people could move within their own countries. So it's not cross-border movement, but within their own countries, due to slow onset climate change impacts by 2050. Of course, there are many controversies behind these figures, but nevertheless, these surprising predictions probably are really triggering policy approaches to this issue. I'd like to take a step back to situate how this problem is conceptualized, a security issue. And what I'd like to underline is a plurality in conceptualizing migration and security in terms of climate security issue. On one hand, we can talk about national security, and as represented by the White House document by the United States, some see it as a national security issue caused by the increasing number of migrants that are flowing into those mostly developed countries, and that destabilizes the society. But on the other hand, this issue is also conceptualized as a human security issue. Namely, it's a matter of human survival and human security caused by extreme as well as slow onset climate impacts. Policy measures such as planned relocation are discussed from this viewpoint. And on the right bottom hand, there's a report issued by United Nations Secretary General, Action Agenda on Internal Displacement, trying to establish some principled ideas to how to respond to this human security aspect of it. And we more and more observe that there is an international security awareness that both developed and developing countries should cooperate and formulate an integrated measure to approach this human mobility caused by climate change. But again, since the polycentricity of the issue, namely, it is very difficult to conceptualize this issue, whether it can be migration issue, it can be climate change, part of the climate change issue, part of the loss and damage issue as well. So this polycentricity of the forums that govern it make this problem very difficult to regulate. Against this background, our research group aims to provide policy recommendations on how to better prepare for climate mobility through national, bilateral, and regional approaches. We have several research questions, and actually the second one listed here is partly answered by the Pankaj-san's presentation, and we do basically the case studies in Bangladesh and Fiji. But what I will mainly talk about is this first one, namely, what is the current shape of multi-level governance of climate-induced migration, and what are the dominant ideas behind the governance landscape, and what are the key gaps? So what we try to do is basically a policy analysis and how people conceptualize the issue at the national and regional level, and what are the ideas behind it. So the main method we employ is, firstly, we conduct desktop review of relevant legal and policy documents. And then also we interview policymakers and relevant stakeholders to understand the background of such policy instruments. I don't really touch upon the disciplinary viewpoint of this research method, but it has a background in a legal research where we conduct a doctrinal analysis of legal and policy documents, but we supplement it with an interview with policymakers to provide an internal viewpoint. This approach is called sociological approach of law or contextualized approach of law, just for information. I can skip this concept to understand because Pankaj-san greatly introduces these aspects. Basically, there are multifaceted nature of migration. I can also almost skip, but this actually shows a mapping of policy approaches that we're trying to elaborate. There are different layers ranging from international, regional, and national security. And we also identify some categories, such as science and policy interface, laws, norms, and policies, and projects and activities. There are different norms and policies related to climate change and migration, and more on climate-induced migration in the Pacific countries, as I introduced in the later stage. But I also investigate projects and activities, because these are the places where new norms and new ideas to regulate these issues are emerging. So briefly touch upon from the international level first. I can't explain everything, but I'd like to touch upon just one thing, which is there can be an emerging coordination by the UNFCCC regime. But we need to further assessment whether we can really say that UNFCCC is coordinating this issue. But the task force on displacement established under the rubric of Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, the UNFCCC, it tries to coordinate, as visualized on the right-hand side, different actors and different approaches that affect this issue of climate mobilities. So arguably, it can be a new model of international governance that emerging under the climate change regime. So maybe we better to conceptualize this as a part of climate change rather than part of migration. But that's a question that we still trying to explore. Some of the regional approaches are emerging in the Pacific countries. One is Board Declaration on Regional Security, and the other is Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility. This is very notable. The Pacific is the only region that really conceptualized this issue as climate mobility. Other countries talk about mobilities or migration or refugees, but this is the only place where we see the term in climate mobility outside of the academia. And we interviewed to this PIF, the Pacific Island Forum, and the key functions of these documents are, first, enhance cooperation among Pacific countries, and second, strengthen Pacific voices to the international community. So these are the emerging regional governance functions that we are observing. Sorry, I'm exceeding time, so I couldn't make a promise, but anyways. The national policies in Fiji, very briefly, Fiji is one of the most, Fiji has one of the most developed policy package to respond to this issue. As I listed here, they have a planned relocation guidelines, and they have a standing operating procedure for planned relocation, and they have also finance management policy guideline. And they conceptualize it as a policy package. Planned relocation in Fiji is considered as a last resort measure after the old adaptation measures are exhausted, and still risk is there. And the key function of these policy instruments are, first, to stabilize the process of relocation and prevent unwanted migration. And importantly, second, to provide higher predictability for donor organizations that those relocations are safe to fund. Planned relocation and migration can be considered a very sensitive issue, and donors have been reluctant to fund such policy measures. But these policy instruments are developed just to provide predictability for those outside the country so that they can feel safer to support it. So tentative summary of what we find from the international, regional, and national approaches to this climate mobility issue. We find that currently no international organization has a clear institutional mandate to cover climate-induced mobilities, but arguably the UNFCCC process plays a role in coordinating responses to climate-induced mobilities. And many relevant stakeholders point out that the key remaining gaps are lack of finance and resources, and in the context of Fiji, policy instruments are almost ready and they need to be implemented. However, they see difficulty in accessing international support, and further analysis of this gap is needed for the multi-level governance to better function. We also observe that many regional and national policy instruments have dual functions. One is addressing national policy gaps, obviously, but the other interacts with international governance. So more and more in analyzing national responses to this issue, we have to embed it in an international governance framework. And lastly, but most importantly, Apart from the multi-level governance perspective, our experience in Fiji and Pacific countries on plant relocations could be good lessons for other countries and regions. This is where our policy analysis can be connected to the policy recommendations and can be replicated to the other countries with further investigation, such as Bangladesh. So that concludes my discussion, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Okana-san, and thank you to all the speakers for their insightful presentations. So now we have just a bit of time for a panel discussion. So we would like to prioritize the Q&A, so please prepare a question. But before we move on to that, I would like to just ask 2 short questions, and you can answer in a combined way. So to all the speakers, to all 3 speakers, I would like to know more about how the food security and human mobility are interconnected, and what are the potential benefits in addressing climate security through specifically those 2 research areas. Please, maybe Kurishima-san? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. And so I want to make my answer short, but so there's linkages between climate change, food, human mobility, and food security in the direction of having climate change and then migrate and have food insecurity in the area that migrate. But I want to explain about the other way. So the case of food insecurity, like the decrease of food production in the rural area due to climate change becomes the major factor for the migration. And so in this case, there's like, I think there's 2 types of migration. The one is like the short onset disasters. Like they have like a very serious disaster that destroys agricultural land and they have to move to another place. And then the other one is the slow onset disasters that like gradually the land get degraded, and then they cannot harvest anymore, and then they have to move to another place. So this is like one example of linkages between human mobility, food security, and climate change. And I think the advantage of the integrated approach of addressing food security and human mobility is I think the keyword is trade-offs and the synergies that was discussed in the plenary session. And so integrated approach, I think, avoids the trade-offs of this climate change, food insecurity, and human mobility, and they will create more synergies between each other. And I think the synergies is, the keyword is inclusion that I was talking in my presentation. So the vulnerable people will often be left out, but in this integrated approach, I think that we can address more for the vulnerable peoples.
Great, thank you so much, Kurishima-san. Next, maybe Pankaj. Okay.
As we have, thank you for the question. And as I have shown the example from Bangladesh, during the extreme weather condition, as you can see that all the agriculture land got inundated with the salt water, and the farmland are no longer can be used even during the dry season because it has salt embedded in the soil. First, and second is like all the stored water get also brackish, and that's why the farmers got forced to change their occupation, say for example, from a paddy field to now shifting to the aquaculture. But for that aquaculture, they need brackish water. And what they are doing in the like deep land, or like say for example, farmland, they are using brackish water to do the prawn culture. But that using that or storing that brackish water for long term, it also degraded the land itself. So for the longer term, it will have cascading effect on both water resources because it recharges the groundwater and it degrades the groundwater as well. So they will be devoid of all drinking water as well as water for agriculture as well as the land for agriculture. So there is a direct connection between water, climate, human well-being, or economic well-being. So that's why having an integrated approach to study the nexus between climate, water, health, as well as other issues are very much critical. Because say, for example, once farmers are forced to do the aquaculture, their skin are having different, their skin are exposed to salt water, and that's why they are having different kind of diseases as well. So there is a direct linkage between the climate, health, water, as well as food. So that's why we need a nexus approach to study these kind of things in order to delineate the policy relevant messages. Thank you so much. Based on the robust scientific data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pankaj-san. So I understand we can't be working in silos anymore and we have to adopt this integrated approach. Thank you. So Okano-san, please.
Thank you. Pankaj explained quite well about the relationship between migration and food security. Obviously, food security is a fundamental issue for many people in the developing country, as Kurishima-san mentioned. And the more I conduct interviews to the Fiji government officers about these planned relocation policies, they actually say that many people say that it's actually part of the food security issue, and food security is the most important part to be considered as in a framework of human mobilities. So in case of Fiji, the access to ocean and access to blue food, basically fish and ocean-based food, are quite important for the local communities because that's a traditional way for them to access to food. But when, for example, their communities are relocated to the inland, that's really difficult to manage their original way of fishery, that are conducted in the original place. But that kind of issue was not quite recognized in the current policy framework of the human mobilities, but more and more people are aware about this seriousness of this issue. So yeah, certainly we need to develop the integrated approach of this human mobility and food security, and that's somewhere that this project can really jump in to provide good policy recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all three speakers for their very insightful answers. So now we would like to welcome some questions from the audience. So we are welcoming questions in both English and Japanese, so please don't be shy. And when asking a question, please state your name and your occupation, and please address your question to one of the speakers or to all of them. Yeah, so please, are there any questions? Yes, I see someone
there. Thank you very much for all speakers for the insights. My name is Oscar. I'm from Tohoku University. I have maybe two questions to Kurushima-san. Yeah. So the first, for the community-based land agriculture management, does it yield to more harvest compared to the state-owned or other kind? And I also wonder about the post-harvest, because we talk about community. Is it how this community-based management ensure the fairness in the income distribution, for example, after the harvest? And then can I add one more? Due to the climate change, I assume that some agriculture will shift. For example, for some crops that are more more resistant to the climate change. In the case of the community-based land agriculture management, how this decision is made? That's all my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. So Kurushima-san, do you have answers about
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. And yes, I wanted to explain about this community land management more, but because of the limited time, I couldn't explain. But for your first question, does the community land management produce more yield? So this is just based on the research sites that I visited. I visited like 5 or 6 research sites in Philippines and Thailand. But basically, no, at this moment, because this policy is relatively new, and they traditionally harvested in the land, and then the policy has changed that land into the public lands, and then so they need this new initiative to secure their land tenure. So the agriculture system, or like what they grow, hasn't changed much. So it doesn't have any connection with the yield. But if their land is no more cannot harvest in that land anymore. Obviously, they have like several lands, like in private. They also have private land as well. So if they cannot harvest in this public land anymore, they can only produce in the private land. So that's obviously a decrease in the yield. So that's what I've seen in the communities. And for the fairness, as I explained, it's the traditional. So they have traditionally cultivated in the land. So if they don't have this land, they cannot have this community land right. So they have to own or like use the land before in order to have this land. So I think the fairness is one of the issues now. But if the land is abandoned, the land will be contributed to the community members. So it's better than not having this community-based system. And for your third question,
Adaptation. Can they change the crops to?
Yeah. So for the more climate resilient crops, so they will discuss among the community members because the land is obviously beside each other. So they will discuss like what kind of crops will be more resilient to the climate change. So they will have more discussion among the community members. So it would the decision will be made based on like different kind of opinions. So I think it would be they would have more opportunities for having climate resilient crops.
Thank you very much for your answers. Yes.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who wants to ask questions? I think we still have a bit of time for maybe one question. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Hiroshi Ota, and I work at the Daiichi Life Insurance Company. I think my question is to Kumaro-san or Okano-san. For the people who are forced to mobilize because of the natural disasters, I think they still have affection to their homelands, the lands that they had to evacuate from. Maybe those lands are from, heritated from their ancestors. So as a policy by the government, do you think a government should take any measures to restore the land so that those mobilized people can go back to those lands and restart their lives in their original homelands? I think sometimes it's very difficult. For example, in lands where flooded by seawaters, maybe sometimes they have to, replace the soils to return to the original situations. But do you think the government should take those kind of measures and use their funds to do that kind of policies, or do you think that the government should use the money or funds to something else to better help those people? Thank you very much.
Thank you for this interesting question. First of all, we need to see how extreme damage is there. Say, for example, the river embankment, how much it got damaged. And the damage of the river embankment depends on the river discharge or the depth of the river. Say, for example, if it is just nearby the embankment and it got intruded by the salt water for longer time, there is no return point. Means even if you build a bigger embankment, the land is no longer be used after it got dried up. This is first. Second is the local government or national government, they are in discussion point that they are trying to build a new embankment where the river should not flood the new land itself in the extreme weather in the future. But there is a policy related or poor policy related challenges as well. Because even say, for example, the national government is releasing some fund, but because of the corruption and all, the local players are playing a different role. And because of the corruption, the money which is being released by the national government, it is not being percolated to the ground. And a very little percentage of that fund is being used to build a new embankment. That is also not good for the local people. And that's why the local government, what they are trying to do, in rather than building a new embankment with a good solid material, they are trying to build it with the loose material, as well as they are trying to make people content with giving a very little amount of cash in hand. That say, for example, okay, I will give you 1,000 Bangladeshi currency that you can switch over this harsh situation. But this is a not long-term situation. So that's why now what the local government and national government are talking about, that in order for a long-term goal, we need to have a partnership throughout all the relevant stakeholders, whether there will be a good role being played by the community-based organization, national NGOs, and other farmers association, and they will co-generate some fund which will be used to build a embankment and which can protect the local communities. That's what I can say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kumar-san.
Or do we have time or no?
Just
Just a bit. Okay. Just 2 points that, sorry, thanks. That's a very important point. One thing is that it's a matter of policy judgment of each country. And in case of Fiji, that idea of the affection to the land is already reflected in the policy, arguably. One thing is that, it's understood as a last measure after all the adaptation measures are exhausted. So we don't really simply relocate community, but we have to do everything before we relocate. And the other thing is the 90% of the community people have to agree before they really relocate. So we try to make it inclusive decisions so that, although we can say 100%, that was kind of policy judgment that Fiji government made, but that idea of the affection to land was reflected in these systems. Second is, that's, in case of Fiji, it's related to sea level rise, obviously. And that point is discussed under the name of the non-economic loss and damage currently at the international negotiation process. And there will be the emerging norms that are, in the coming years. So we also need to follow that debate so that what kind of treatment we can provide to, that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Okana-san. Thank you for the very thought-provoking questions. So I would like to conclude the session here. Thank you so much for your attention and for this very stimulating dialogue. We can continue the discussion over the drinks after the closing session. So thank you.